1 week after an ICE officer in Minneapolis shot and killed an American citizen, Renee Good, the very moment of her death captured on camera and dissected frame by frame.
An officer tells the woman in the vehicle to stop, but she drives off, and a second officer fires his gun.
Donald Trump would tell the people of Minnesota, "Fear not, the day of reckoning and retribution is coming." The next day, yesterday, as of the moment I'm recording this, ICE officers would shoot a second person in Minneapolis.
A Venezuelan national was shot in the leg by an ICE agent following a car chase.
The subject of the stop, a Venezuelan immigrant, tried to flee and a struggle ensued. Officials say 2 people came out of nearby homes and hit law enforcement with a shovel and a broom handle.
According to one nonprofit tracking gun violence in the U.S., since the start of Trump's crackdown, there have been at least 16 incidents in which immigration agents opened fire. They also often happen when the victims are behind the wheel of a car, fleeing the arresting officers. Renee Good may have fallen into that category if she was accelerating away from the officer who would shoot her 3 times instead of towards him, as the Trump administration claims. And almost every day, we are seeing confrontations in Minnesota that escalate in strikingly similar and dangerous ways. I'll show you one more. What you're watching here happened after the killing of Renee Good, and just blocks away. We don't know who this is behind the wheel, but this is an ICE officer ordering the driver to move her car. As in the death of Renee Good, the agent here tries to open the driver's side door. He also reaches into the car briefly, and as in previously deadly cases, the driver accelerates suddenly. It's impossible to know what might have happened at this exact moment if an ICE agent had been near the front of her car at that exact moment. But as the officers around her continue to try to get her to move, we see her car jerk forward at least 4 more times by my count. Here, if you look closely, you can see her rear left wheel spin. Again here, her foot goes off the brake, her hands outstretched at the ICE officer on her right while she's trying to speak to those on her left. Within just seconds, an officer breaks her passenger side window and her car jolts forward for a 3rd time. And then once more, the car surges ahead. But by this point, it's less and less clear whether ICE agents are more interested in seeing her leave or arresting her. They force her car door open, drag her out onto the street, and cut her seatbelt with a knife. According to the Department of Homeland Security, she was an agitator, arrested for obstruction. According to her, she's autistic and was on her way to a doctor's appointment. I can only assume the full truth is somewhere in between these 2 accounts. But what I think is worth pointing out is that this isn't coincidence that within blocks of the shooting death of Renee Good, you have this altercation I just showed you that could very well have ended the same way, and then another where a person was actually shot after apparently trying to evade ICE officers. Finally, this morning, Trump threatening to invoke the Insurrection Act, which could allow him to deploy U.S. soldiers inside Minnesota's borders. More guns, more order, more control. If these confrontations feel like they're intensifying, we can start to understand why that is by looking at what brought the crackdown to Minnesota in the first place.
ICE will launch an enforcement sweep in the Twin Cities this week.
ICE steps up activity in Minnesota, targeting the undocumented.
Operation Metro Surge, as it would come to be known, was part of a much longer-standing push by the Trump administration to apprehend and deport undocumented immigrants.
All illegal entry will immediately be halted, and we will begin the process of returning millions and millions of criminal aliens back to the places from which they came.
But what quickly set this operation apart from others was, first, its size. The figure widely reported 2,000 federal agents and officers descending specifically on the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul, but also its focus. Metropolitan areas, not border towns, and very intentionally singling out Somalis living in America.
The Somalians should be out of here. They've destroyed our country. And all they do is complain, complain, complain.
There is a long history of both federal and FBI enforcement and surveillance tactics against the Somali community in the United United States, but in particular in Minneapolis.
There was a large federal investigation into fraud and corruption surrounding government aid and government benefits that were given out during COVID. And what this investigation revealed in Minnesota was some widespread fraud.
These allegations of fraud go back to the Biden administration. In 2022, the Department of Justice announced charges against 47 people, accusing them of fraud worth $250 million. This involved a state-run but federally funded child nutrition program during the pandemic. And the head of that program was accused and ultimately found guilty under Trump's DOJ of effectively stealing taxpayer dollars. Most of her employees were reportedly Somali Americans.
Those programs should go to American citizens, not be defrauded by Somali immigrants and others.
What connects all of this to ICE operations in Minnesota specifically is that more Somali Americans live in Minnesota than in any other state. And Trump sees them all the same way.
Somalians ripped off that state for billions of dollars, billions. I don't want them in our country. Their country's no good for a reason.
What followed comments like this was an immense amount of pressure on the Somali community. Viral videos like this one accused Somali-run daycares of fraud.
Hello, we'd like to ask where the money's going. What do you guys think about the fraud that's taking place here in Minnesota?
I don't think anybody is enabling fraud to happen.
Hold Governor Walz accountable for this.
And what took root was this more and more widely peddled view that Minnesota was a hotbed of immigrant fraud. Nationwide, right-wing content creators began showing up at daycares unannounced.
What's the name of the child care here?
I don't know.
I ask, has this place ever been a child care? The woman says no. But obviously, Washington state records tell a completely different story.
The Somali community complained of feeling harassed, in some cases threatened. And what has developed in parallel, a series of government measures to investigate, but also to punish. Today, those measures are now a full-fledged campaign against immigrant criminality. You can browse online the list of those who've been arrested. The top two at the time I record this, both men of Somali origin, arrested in Minneapolis. And for a month and a half now, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security has put out release after release, painting a very specific portrait of where in the United States immigrants and crime intersect.
If someone is not here in the U.S. legally, then Immigrations and Customs Enforcement has a right to detain the person and initiate deportation proceedings against them. There's nothing illegal about doing that. But the questions that I think concern people is mainly the manner in which this enforcement is being conducted.
What we see is a disconnect between the stated objectives of the mission and the way that they're going about it.
We're not seeing targeted enforcement where individuals who have criminal records are being identified and then investigated and located by ICE agents. We're seeing them just go into cities in large numbers, and just stop people randomly on the street and begin questioning them in the hopes of locating somebody who's deportable.
There are a few ways to try to understand Minnesota's actual state of crime, but none of them is straightforward because what U.S. states don't tend to track is crime based on immigration status. So what you have instead is two sides accusing the other of having made everything worse.
Walz is a grossly incompetent man. There's something wrong with him.
He brought people in there illegally that never should have been in this country.
Minnesota American citizens who were minding their own business and living their lives were detained by and arrested by ICE. These chaotic operations are doing nothing to make us safer.
Targeting people and committing so much time, energy, and money to terrorizing certain groups within our community. That's not American.
There is a frankly shocking amount of reporting gathering people's accounts of ICE surveillance, intimidation, violence, heavy-handed protest response, arrests, crackdowns, threats. The list goes on. At the same time, officials at the federal level have accused those people who get in the way of ICE officers of being agitators, even terrorists.
If you look at what the definition of domestic terrorism is, it completely fits the situation on the ground.
But what both sides of the violence in Minnesota can't seem to resist doing is framing what's happening so unequivocally.
Donald Trump wants this chaos. He wants confusion. And yes, he wants more violence on our streets.
These Democrats are deranged in their hatred for President Trump, and they are holding their state and local law enforcement hostage as a result.
And saying these sorts of things, taking these sorts of positions, sometimes without even first waiting for all of the facts to be established, arriving at conclusions before investigations have even meaningfully begun.
People need to stop using their vehicles as weapons. This domestic act of terrorism to use your vehicle to try to kill law enforcement officers is going to stop.
What I can tell you is the narrative that this was just done in self-defense is a garbage narrative.
You know, the problem here is that when you're in an environment where the leadership takes the position before any investigation, really before any facts are in, that this was a justified and everything was done perfectly, you're probably not going to get any level of accountability.
Earlier this week, the U.S. Justice Department said in the shooting death of Renee Good at the hands of an ICE officer, the DOJ does not currently see any basis on which to even open a criminal civil rights investigation, as we often see in police shootings of civilians. And the U.S. president is threatening to send the U.S. military into Minnesota, meeting the moment with even more force.